My sister-in-law handed me an apron at my own brother's rehearsal dinner and said the caterers could use an extra hand. My brother laughed. The governor of Colorado walked in 20 minutes later, spotted me across the room and said, "There she is, the woman who saved Ridgeline." The room went so quiet I could hear the ice melting in the champagne glasses, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got there. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Aspen Grove Estate, a venue my family had rented for the weekend at what I can only imagine was a significant cost to their credit cards. My brother was marrying Cassidy. Beautiful, well-connected Cassidy, whose father owned car dealerships across 3 states and whose mother sat on the board of 2 private schools. My family had been performing for the Whitmore family for the better part of 18 months, ever since my brother announced the engagement. Every gathering became a showcase. Every conversation was a résumé. I drove up from Denver alone. I had been in back-to-back meetings all week, and I was tired in the specific way you get tired when you've been carrying something heavy for a long time, and you've almost forgotten what it feels like to put it down. I wore a dark green dress. No jewelry worth mentioning. I had learned years ago that when I showed up to family events looking like myself, it confused people, and confused people say things they shouldn't. The estate was all exposed timber and mountain views, the kind of place that photographs well and makes you feel like you're supposed to be having the best night of your life. I gave my name at the check-in table, and the young woman in the headset looked at her clipboard with the kind of careful expression people use when they're deciding how to deliver bad news. "Nora?" She hesitated. "I don't see a seat assignment for you." Before I could respond, I heard heels on the flagstone behind me. "Oh, that's my sister-in-law." Cassidy's voice was warm in the practiced way of someone who had grown up watching their mother work a room. She touched my elbow briefly, the way you'd guide a piece of furniture. She wasn't on the fine account. We weren't sure she'd make it. I had confirmed 3 weeks ago. By text, by email, and in person at the family dinner where my mother served pot roast and everyone pretended we were close. "I'm here," I said. Cassidy smiled. "Of course you are. We'll find somewhere to tuck you." They tucked me at the end of a long table near the kitchen pass-through, between a cousin I'd met twice and an empty chair that stayed empty all evening. I could see my brother from where I sat. He was at the head table with Cassidy's family, laughing too easily, touching his jacket lapels the way he did when he was performing Confidence. My mother sat 2 seats down from him, dressed in the blue she always wore when she wanted to look approachable. She caught my eye once. She smiled in a way that communicated nothing and looked away. I took out my phone to answer 2 emails I'd been putting off. That's when Cassidy reappeared beside me, holding an apron folded over her forearm like a sommelier presenting a wine list. "I hope this isn't weird," she said, in a tone that indicated she had decided it wasn't. "But the catering company sent one fewer person than we contracted for, and things are getting a little backed up. Since you're right here by the kitchen anyway." She held out the apron. My brother was watching from the head table. He looked at the apron. He looked at me. He picked up his champagne glass. I thought about all the things I could have said. I thought about the past 4 years, the 4 a.m. phone calls with investors in different time zones, the week I slept on an air mattress in the back of our office because we couldn't afford to lose a single day, the moment our first real contract came through and I sat in my car in a parking garage and cried so hard I couldn't see the steering wheel. I thought about how none of those things had made it back to this family, not because I'd hidden them, but because no one had ever asked. I didn't take the apron. "I'm fine," I said. "Thank you." Cassidy's smile held. She set the apron on the empty chair beside me, as if it might change my mind, and walked back to the head table. 20 minutes later, the estate doors opened, and the energy in the room shifted the way it does when someone significant arrives. Not louder, quieter. Conversations dropping half a register as people recalibrated who they should be talking to. Governor Hal Deering had not been on the official guest list. He had been invited, I knew, because I had mentioned the wedding to his chief of staff 3 weeks ago during a meeting in Denver. He was there because of a relationship I had spent 2 years building. My family didn't know any of that. My mother rose halfway from her chair. Cassidy's father straightened his tie. My brother's smile went wide and a little desperate. The smile of someone who has been hoping for exactly this and cannot believe it's actually happening. Governor Deering walked past the head table. He walked past Cassidy's father, who had stepped forward slightly. He walked past my mother. He crossed the room in the direction of the kitchen pass-through, where I was sitting next to an apron I had not touched, and he extended his hand. "There she is," he said. "The woman who saved Ridgeline. I've been wanting to say this in person. What your team did for that community is extraordinary." I shook his hand. "Thank you, Governor," I said. "It's good to see you outside of a conference room." He laughed. We talked for 4 minutes. I know it was 4 minutes because I watched the clock on the wall behind his head. Not because I was eager for it to end, but because I wanted to remember it exactly. The room did not resume its normal volume for a long time after he walked away. My brother appeared at my side before I had fully processed what had happened. "What was that?" His voice was low. "A conversation," I said. "Nora." He said my name like a question and a reprimand at the same time. "How do you know the governor?" I looked at him. "Ryan, my brother, 4 years older than me, the one my parents put in the center of every photograph, the one whose college graduation they flew in for, whose law school acceptance they celebrated with a dinner at a restaurant I wasn't invited to, whose engagement they announced to the whole extended family before I'd even met Cassidy. Ryan, who had not asked me a single genuine question in approximately 3 years." "That's a long story," I said. "Maybe sometime you could ask me." I excused myself and went to find a glass of water. "My name is Nora. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 4 years, I've been running a nonprofit called Ridgeline Initiative out of Denver. We work in rural Colorado communities that have been economically gutted by mine closures and agricultural collapse. We bring in job training, small business development resources, broadband infrastructure support, and mental health access in places where the nearest hospital is 45 minutes away, and the nearest therapist might as well be on the moon. We have a staff of 22. We've raised $14 million in the past 18 months from a combination of private foundations, federal grants, and individual donors. Last year, Governor Deering's office cited us in a statewide economic recovery report. We were called one of the most effective rural development organizations in the Mountain West. My family knew I worked for a nonprofit. Beyond that, the details had never been requested. My parents' version of me was fixed sometime around the year I turned 24 and declined to apply to law school, which was the path they had planned for me since approximately the 3rd grade. My brother had taken the path. He was a family law attorney in Colorado Springs, respectable and appropriately compensated, and deeply embedded in the social ecosystem my parents had spent their lives cultivating. I had taken a different road, and the taking of it had been treated as a kind of personal affront, an embarrassment disguised as a life choice. I had moved to Denver. I'd worked for 2 other nonprofits first, learning every part of the operation from grant writing to board governance to community organizing in the actual communities. I had made friends who became colleagues who became the people I called when things got hard. I had built something. The building had been invisible to my family, not because I'd concealed it, but because they'd stopped looking. That night at the rehearsal dinner, sitting in my assigned nowhere spot next to an apron that wasn't mine to wear, I was running on 4 hours of sleep and the quiet knowledge that in 6 days I was scheduled to sign a partnership agreement with a federal agency that would expand our work into 4 additional counties. That knowledge sat in my chest like a warm stone. The morning after the rehearsal dinner, my mother called. I was in the hotel parking lot with coffee I'd made from the in-room machine, watching the mountains do what mountains do in early light. "What was that last night?" she said, skipping hello. "Good morning, Mom. Hal Deering." She said his name like it was a suspicious package. "How do you know the governor, Nora? And why didn't you say something? Cassidy's father was standing right there. Do you know how it looked?" I thought about that. I thought about how it looked from where I was sitting, which was next to a folded apron at a table by the kitchen. "How did it look?" I asked. "Like you were doing something, making some kind of point. I was having a conversation with someone I know professionally. But you didn't tell us. You didn't introduce him to the family. You just let him come to you in front of everyone as if we weren't even." "Mom," I said, "when is the last time you asked me how work was going?" Silence. "I'm very busy," she said eventually. "We all are." "I know," I said. "Me too." The wedding was the following Saturday. It was a genuinely beautiful ceremony, I will give them that. The venue was a different property, higher elevation, with a view of the front range that made several guests cry before the vows even started. I sat in the family section because my brother had, at the last minute, had my seat assignment corrected. "I don't know who made that call," I didn't ask. The reception was where everything accelerated. I was at the bar getting a glass of sparkling water when Cassidy's father, Don Whitmore, appeared beside me. He was a large, pleased-looking man who had spent his evening conducting the social traffic of the room with the confidence of someone who expected to be accommodated. "I've been looking for you," he said, which did not seem entirely true. "Cassie tells me you work in the nonprofit sector." "I run an organization, yes. Community service type of thing." He nodded with the mild approval a person gives to a hobby they find blameless. "Good for you. Ryan's very proud, I'm sure. What is it you actually do day to day?" I explained what Ridgeline does. I kept it concise because I've learned that in social settings, people often want the version that takes 90 seconds and confirms their existing mental category. He listened with his head tilted slightly, the posture of a man waiting for the part that interests him. "Huh," he said when I finished. "So it's grant-funded? You don't generate revenue." "We generate impact," I said. "Which is the point." He smiled the smile of a man who found this answer charming and slightly naive. "Well," he said, "if you ever want to do something with a real business structure behind it, Ryan could probably put you in touch with some people." He moved away towards someone more useful to him. I stood there with my sparkling water and felt something I had felt many times before in relation to my family. Not quite anger, not quite sadness. Something more like the specific exhaustion of being consistently misread by people who have known you your whole life and have never once been curious about who you actually are. My mother found me an hour later, near the end of the reception, when the dancing had started and the older guests were beginning their strategic exits. "Cassidy's mother asked me about you," she said. She looked uncomfortable in a way that I recognized as preceding something she'd been rehearsing. "She wanted to know about your work, after the governor thing." "What did you tell her?" My mother paused. In that pause, I heard 20 years of vague answers given to questions about me. "She does her own thing. She's always been independent. She's figuring things out." I didn't know what to say, she admitted. "I realize I don't actually know what you do, Nora. I know you work with rural communities, but I don't know any of the details. I don't know what Ridgeline is." I looked at her. The music from inside was something slow, an older song, and people were moving through the warm Colorado night air around us like they had nowhere else to be. "I know," I said. "You never asked." She opened her mouth. Closed it. "I would have told you," I said. "Any time in the past 4 years you could have asked me. I would have told you everything." The federal partnership announcement came out 11 days after the wedding. It was the kind of news cycle that doesn't rake into mainstream media, but runs deep in policy circles and regional journalism. And within 48 hours, I had a voicemail from a Denver Post reporter and an email from a foundation in New York that had been on our prospective donor list for 2 years. The partnership would expand our reach to 4 additional counties and bring in $3.2 million in federal funding over 3 years. Combined with our existing operations, it meant we could hire 8 more full-time staff and double our capacity in mental health services. My phone did not stop. For 4 days, it did not stop. On the 5th day, my brother called. I answered. We had not spoken since the wedding when he had found me near the exit and asked, again, about the governor, and I had again given him an answer that contained more question than explanation. I read the article he said. "Which one?" The Denver Post piece. A pause. And the Colorado Sun follow-up. Another pause. "And I may have done some reading on your organization's 990 filings." The 990 is the tax form nonprofits file annually. Publicly available, containing financial information about funding sources and executive compensation. My brother, the attorney, would have known exactly where to find it. "Okay," I said. "Nora." His voice was different than it had been at the rehearsal dinner. The performance version of him was gone. "Why didn't you tell us any of this?" I sat with the question for a moment before I answered. "Because you never asked, Ryan. That's the true answer," he asked. "Ryan. That's the true answer. You never asked. Not once in 4 years. How's work? What are you working on? Is it going okay?" "Nothing. I was just a fact about your life. The sister who works at a nonprofit. File and move on." "That's not fair, isn't it?" I said. "Tell me the last time you called me to ask how I was doing. Not about a family event. Not about Christmas plans. Just how are you, Nora?" He was quiet long enough that I knew he was looking for it and couldn't find it. I don't know, he said. I don't know when. I know, I said. I kept track. I didn't say it meanly. I said it because it was true and because the truth deserved to occupy the space between us without anyone softening it. I want to understand what you've built, he said finally. I'd like to. If you let me. That's a start, I said. But wanting to understand now because it showed up in the paper is different from wanting to understand because you're my brother. He didn't have an answer for that. I didn't expect one. Those kinds of answers take time to develop. They can't be produced on the spot just because the conversation requires them. My mother came to Denver 3 weeks after the wedding. She didn't announce it in advance. My assistant buzzed me from the front desk to say there was a woman downstairs who said she was my mother and did not have an appointment, and I should tell me what she should do with that information. I told her to send her up. My mother walked into my office and looked around the way people look at a place when they are trying to reconcile it with the image they've been carrying. The building is a converted warehouse in Reno, exposed brick, a lot of natural light, staff desks arranged in an open floor plan, with a handful of small conference rooms along one wall. On the far side, there is a full wall of photographs from our community sites. Families at job training sessions, a new community health clinic we helped fund in a town called Hartfield that hadn't had one in 12 years. A group of high school students from a county where the graduation rate had been below 60%, now in cap and gown. My mother looked at the photographs for a long time. You did all of this, she said. It was not quite a question. My team did all of this, I said. I run the organization. She sat down across from my desk. She was wearing the expression she got when she was trying to do something emotionally that did not come naturally to her, like holding a door open against a strong wind. I owe you an apology, she said. I waited. Multiple apologies, she added. The apron, the seating, the way I've spoken about your work to people, the way I haven't spoken about your work to people. She pressed her lips together. I told Dawn Whitmore you were finding your way. At Thanksgiving, 3 years ago, I told your aunt you were doing community volunteer work. I made your life sound like a placeholder because I didn't understand it and I was ashamed of not understanding it. The honesty caught me off guard. My mother was not a woman who led with vulnerability. It had taken something significant to bring her here. I don't need you to understand everything, I said. I need you to be curious. There's a difference. She nodded. Her eyes moved back to the wall of photographs. The little girl in the yellow jacket, she said, pointing to one image, in front of the clinic. Her name is Marisol. She lives in Hartfield. The nearest pediatrician before we helped fund that clinic was 40 miles away. Her mom used to take 3 buses to get there. My mother was quiet for a moment. Why didn't you tell me about things like that? She asked. Because the last time I tried, about 2 years ago, you changed the subject to Ryan's new car. I said it without malice. I said it because it was a thing that had happened and it deserved to be named. I stopped offering information that was going to be put down before it had a chance to mean anything. She did not defend herself. That too surprised me. I'd like to start over, she said, with understanding what you do, if you'll let me. I looked at her, my mother, who had spent 31 years being prouder of the version of me that fit the plan than of the version of me that actually existed. She looked tired. She looked older than she had at the rehearsal dinner. She looked like a woman who had done some math and discovered the answer was not what she expected. Come to our community site visit next month, I said. Hartfield. You can see what we actually do, but I need you to come as a visitor, not as my mother performing interest. There's a difference. She said she understood. She came. She sat in the back of a community meeting in a church hall where 14 residents talked about what the new small business training program had meant for them. She met Marisol's mother. She ate a very bad cup of coffee out of a foam cup and did not complain about it. On the drive back to the highway, she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, I've been wrong about a lot of things. I'm not sure I know how to fix it, but I want to try. That's enough, I said. For now, that's enough. Ryan and I met for lunch the month after that. A diner in Capitol Hill, his suggestion. He arrived before me and was drinking coffee when I came in, and he looked like a man who had thought carefully about what he was going to say and then decided to throw it out and start from scratch. I've been seeing a therapist, he said, before I'd even sat down. Since the wedding, actually. It's been clarifying. Good, I said. I spent a lot of years being the one they put in front, he said. I didn't think about what that cost you. I thought I'd earned it. I thought being chosen meant I was better, not that you were being erased. He wrapped his hands around his mug. I'm trying to understand the difference now. I ordered eggs and coffee and we talked for 2 hours. It was not easy the way conversations between people who have resolved something are easy. It was difficult, the way conversations between people who are beginning something new are difficult. There was too much history to pretend otherwise. But there was also something real underneath the history. The people we had been before our parents' expectations had sorted us into categories. And that realness was what we were reaching for. I didn't forgive him that afternoon. Forgiveness, I've learned, is less of a moment and more of a practice, something you have to choose repeatedly over time. But I left the diner feeling something I hadn't felt in relation to my family in a very long time, a small warmth. A door, not open, but unlocked. Cassidy is another matter. We will probably never be close, and I've made peace with that. She is who she is. Someone who moves through the world by managing perceptions, who treated me as a variable to be controlled rather than a person to be known. I don't hate her. I don't particularly want anything from her or for her. We will be polite at Christmases and we will not be friends, and that is fine. Not every story has the kind of ending where everyone grows. My parents are slower. My father still hasn't fully processed that his understanding of me was built on assumptions rather than information. He is a man who finds uncertainty deeply uncomfortable and who has spent his life arranging things to minimize it, including, I think, his understanding of his own daughter. The hospital, when it came, he had a cardiac episode 6 months after the wedding, nothing life-threatening but serious enough to require a week of monitoring. Broke something open in him. I went. I sat with him for an afternoon. He told me he was proud of me in the specific, exhausted way that people tell the truth when they are too tired to say anything else. I told him I appreciated it. I told him I needed time. He nodded and said he understood, and I believed he was trying to. What I want to say, what I think about when I'm driving back from Hartfield or sitting in a grant review or watching my team do work that actually changes the conditions of people's lives, is that none of what happened to me was about revenge. I didn't plan any of it. I didn't engineer the governor's entrance or time the federal announcement to coincide with anything. I just built something real and let it be real, and eventually the world around me had to rearrange itself to account for what was real. The apron is a good symbol, I think. They handed me an apron because that's what they saw when they looked at me. Someone adjacent to the work, someone to be directed, someone whose purpose was to make the event run smoothly for the people they actually cared about. I didn't take the apron because I knew who I was, even when they didn't. Not in an angry way, not in a look at me way. I just knew, quietly, the way you know things you've earned. The most powerful thing I've ever done isn't raising $14 million or getting cited in a governor's report, or any of the external things that became visible when the right people started paying attention. The most powerful thing I'd done is stop needing my family to see me in order to know that I'm worth seeing. That took longer than any grant cycle, harder than any board meeting, cost more than any budget line. And it was the only thing that finally made the rest of it possible. If you've ever been the one in your family that got handed the apron, tell me about it, because I think there are more of us than anyone talks about, and I think the story doesn't end with the apron. There's something nobody tells you about being the overlooked one in your family. It's not just that it hurts. It's that after long enough, you start to manage the hurt, the way you manage a bad knee. You adjust your stride. You stop climbing certain stairs. You build your whole life around working with what you have instead of grieving what you don't. I stopped expecting my family to see me long before the rehearsal dinner. I had quietly adjusted my stride so many times I almost forgot I was doing it. What I didn't expect was the apron, not because it was cruel, though it was, but because it was so completely honest. Cassidy handing me that folded apron was the clearest statement my family had made about me in years, not in anger. Not even with awareness of what she was doing. Just the clean, unthinking logic of someone who looks at you and sees a function, not a person. You're here. There's work that needs doing. The conclusion writes itself. The thing about that kind of dismissal is that it carries an invitation inside it. You can take the apron, You can spend the rest of the night proving you belong by making yourself useful on their terms. Or you can set it down quietly and let the evening unfold on its own. I set it down, and the evening did the rest. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since then, not in a cosmic sense. I don't think the universe was arranging things to teach my mother a lesson or give my brother a moment of reckoning. What I believe is simpler and, I think, more true. Actions compound. The years I spent building Ridgeline, the relationships I invested in, the work I showed up for when no one in my family was watching, those were causes. Governor Deering crossing that room was an effect. It wasn't magic. It was just the long game finally becoming visible. And that's what I want to say to anyone who recognizes something in this story. The integrity you practice when no one's paying attention is not wasted. It doesn't disappear into the void. It accumulates. The discipline of doing real work for its own sake, not for recognition, not to prove something to people who've already decided about you. That's not sacrifice. That's investment. The return just doesn't come on anyone else's timeline. Ryan is still figuring out who he is without the golden child label to organize himself around. My mother is still learning how to be curious about a daughter she thought she already understood. Neither of those processes is moving fast, and I'd stopped needing them to. That's the other thing. I spent years waiting for my family's perception of me to change before I could fully inhabit my own life. The waiting was the cage. The moment I stopped waiting, I was already out. Nora at the rehearsal dinner, sitting by the kitchen pass-through, answering emails. She wasn't performing patience. She wasn't biding her time for a dramatic reveal. She was just living her actual life in the room she'd been given, and her actual life happened to be larger than anyone in that room knew. That's not a strategy. That's just what it looks like when you've stopped shrinking. The most honest thing I can tell you is this. I didn't win anything that night. I just stopped losing on their terms. And that turned out to be the whole thing.